let's talk about how elections work in the United States. What are some of the distinctives of the American electoral process? So one of those things that stands out in America as opposed to other countries, whether this is Canada or other European, Western European nations, is that there are a large number of offices filled by election. We vote for everything in the United States. We vote for school board members, people on the Water and Power Commission, not just presidents, etc., but many, many local offices are filled by election. And this is something that we're used to, but it's something that's distinctive. Most other countries in Western Europe don't vote quite that as much. That leads to low voter turnout. That's something else that's distinctive about the American political process. Voter turnout is very low in the United States compared with other countries, even in presidential elections. It is not surprising for half of the registered voters not to vote. If voter turnout gets as high as 55 or 60% in a presidential election, that's considered a very good turnout. And in local elections, in what are called off-year elections, that is to say elections when you're not voting for a representative or a senator, and you are simply voting for that school board member or member of the local water commission, voter turnout can be in the teens, 10, 15% voter turnout is not at all surprising in the United States. A third distinctive, in addition to a large number of voters, or a large number of offices being voted on, and low voter turnout, is the fact that in America, political parties tend to be very weak. There are not too many people that always vote a party line. They tend to vote one way or the other, but there's more crossover in America than you would find in other countries. In America, you might register as a Democrat or Republican or one of the other minor parties, but often voters in America are very independent. And if they don't happen to like the particular candidate that the Democrats or the Republicans are running, they'll either not vote at all or vote for the other one. Well, history of voting. How has voting worked in America? Today, we have what we would consider universal manhood suffrage, universal adult suffrage, I should say. In the early part of our country's history, in general, you could vote if you were white, adult, male, and a significant property owner. There were some places that allowed free people of color to vote, but that went away pretty quick. Usually, you could pretty much say by rule of thumb, in the United States in the early 1800s, you had to be a white adult male and a significant property owner. The thinking behind this was that people that were not property owners, people that did not have a stake in society, something to lose if they voted poorly, ought not to have a say in who gets elected. Why would the typical unemployed vagrant have the right to vote for a candidate that might raise taxes when that person has nothing to tax? So that stays that way, and there are some in the 1830s, some property qualification changes during the time of Andrew Jackson that we mentioned in an earlier lecture, A Man of the People. Many of the property requirements go away, so that by the time you get to the 1840s, it's white adult male. That changes with the 15th Amendment. After the Civil War, there are 3 amendments to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865. The 14th Amendment made slaves citizens. That's in 1868. That's the one with the Equal Protection Clause we talked about earlier. The 15th Amendment is in 1870, and it is designed to give African Americans the right to vote. It says the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It was designed to give these newly freed blacks in the South the right to vote, but if you listen closely, you notice that it doesn't really give the right to vote to anybody. It simply lays down 3 conditions by which you can't keep somebody from voting. It says the right to vote cannot be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So we can't keep you from voting because of your race, because of your color, or because you've once been a slave. But what if we pass a law, as they did in Louisiana, that says you can vote in Louisiana if your grandfather could vote? Well, if you're an African American in Louisiana, there's no way your grandfather could vote because your grandfather was a slave. And since your grandfather couldn't vote, you can't vote. And the beauty of this is since you can't vote, your grandchild can't vote. This will keep people from voting forever. Who does it target? Obviously, the freed African Americans. But it has nothing to do with their race, their color, or previous condition of servitude. This was the way people got around it. The 15th Amendment was designed to give African Americans the right to vote, but it doesn't work nearly as well in the South as it could have. The next big step forward in voting is the 19th Amendment. Now we're in the 20th century and women get the right to vote. This opens it up. Women get the right to vote. One of the interesting things in American history, and you can talk about this as you'd like, is that in American history, the white male population, which was the power brokers, gave freed slaves, freed black slaves, African men slaves, the right to vote before they gave white women the right to vote. That is to say that they were more eager to let a man who had once been their property vote than their wife. Okay? Not saying it's good or bad, just putting it out there as part of the American political process. Interesting, if you want to kind of bring that up to the 21st century, in the campaign for who would be the Democratic nominee in 2008, you had essentially two candidates. You had an African-American man, Barack Obama. You had a woman, Hillary Clinton. It was not surprising at all that more people were comfortable with an African-American running for president than with a woman. Not good or bad, just the way it is. Well, things don't change again until 1965. 1965, we get the Voting Rights Act. And what the Voting Rights Act does, signed by Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s, is actually put into effect the 15th Amendment of 95 years before. That 15th Amendment that had changed, intentionally changed voting to allow the African American to vote, that had never gone into effect, was finally put into effect with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and it eliminated those loopholes like grandfather clauses or literacy tests or poll taxes. And then the final change in the American voting procedures, or in expanding the franchise, if you want to call it that, came in 1972 with the 26th Amendment of the Constitution. This allowed 18-year-olds the right to vote. This was brought about by the Vietnam War. The idea is, if I'm old enough to die for my country, I'm old enough to vote for the president. That was a slogan that was very popular at this time that lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. And that's where we stand today. Well, these are the people that can vote, but who actually does vote? What is voter participation like? We talked before that voter participation is very low in the United States, but there are some people that tend to vote more than others. Now, these are just trends. It's not universal, but in general, here are some things that are true about American elections. In general, the more higher educated people are, the more likely they are to vote. Again, that's not universal. It doesn't mean that everybody with a college degree always votes and people that dropped out of high school never vote. But in general, the trends are that the more highly educated you are, the more likely you are to vote. Men are more likely to vote than women. Don't know why this is, but it is. Generally, the percentage of men who vote is higher than the percentage of registered female voters that vote. A third trend is that people that are older tend to vote more regularly than people that are younger. Again, a lot of studies as to why that is. It might be because retired people have more time on their hands than their 40-something person who has to go work 8 or 10 hours a day and is too tired to really care about that off-year election for who's going to be the dog catcher for the town. But in general, older people vote more often and more regularly than younger people. Now, this has changed, especially in terms of ethnicity, race and ethnicity lately. And one of the popular trends in American politics today is trying to chart, okay, how do Hispanic and Latin American voters go? How do Asian American voters? How do these different ethnic trends tend to vote? What tends to bring them out? And there are experts paid hundreds of thousands of dollars employed by both political parties to try to channel getting voters out and trying to channel issues that will appeal to different voters. And ethnicity is becoming a huge one of these. Well, the last thing I want to talk about in this lecture is the role of campaigns. In other words, we've got voters, we know who can vote, we know who's more likely to vote, but what brings them out? Well, in campaigns, clearly the most important factor is media. There's much more of a focus in the American political process of the individual rather than the party. Again, in America, we tend to vote for the person, not the party. Now, people register again with a particular political party, and they tend to lean that way, but we are picky people. We are very independent. We like our individualism, and if we're not satisfied with this candidate or that candidate, we'll go with somebody else, or we simply won't vote at all. So there's a great deal of emphasis on the person, and that emphasis is placed on them by the media. We live in a soundbite generation. It used to be the paper press, right? Back in the early part of our country's history, most people never saw the president physically. They might see a picture of him in a paper. They probably never heard his voice. That doesn't change until the 1920s, when for the first time, most Americans actually heard the president. Now, people see the president, and everybody sees the president. The nightly news is always there. The sound bites are always there. With the internet, everything the president does out of doors is visible for all of us. And this applies to governors and mayors, etc. as well. Okay, the media is important, and controlling the media is a vital part of being elected and being successful as a politician. You have to understand the role of the media in presidential elections, even in deciding what is talked about, is vital. We'll do a whole talk on this coming up. The last thing I would mention about campaigns, in addition to the fact that they're going to be individually focused and that there's an emphasis on the media, is that it is incredibly expensive to run for political office. Even to be, say, a city councilman in a local town, I live in the Antelope Valley, and I know that to run for city council up there takes tens of thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands of dollars. To run for Congress, you need $1 million at your disposal. To run for the Senate, several million. To run for president, tens of millions of dollars. Nobody's expecting you to come up with this out of pocket, but you're going to need to have access to that kind of money. And some people say that that has limited the people that can be president, the people that can be senator, the people that can be governor or even mayor. If you don't have access to people with that kind of revenue, can you actually get the media attention you need to get the attention focused on yourself to be elected?